Chapter 16. The Battle. There was little sleep in the shaman's hut that night. The old wizard huddled in his shabby cloak and watched the young giant whose life had been so dearly bought. Conan sketched battle plans with charcoal on the well-scrubbed hearth. Subutai kept an eye on Yazimina, who lay in the old man's bed, tied to a bedpost. When dawn burnished the still waters of the Valiant Sea, the small house became a beehive of activity. Pallets were rolled up, and the stew pot set to warming on its hook above a fresh-lit fire. Subutai slipped out to forage for supplies of war. The old man puttered among his piled effects for remnants of arms and armor, or for things that might be so employed. Yazimina sat on the side of the bed, staring at the Cimmerian. Her eyes sparkled with anger, her rose-petal mouth was inverted by a sneer. "Enjoy this day, barbarian dog," she spat, "for it will be your last." Conan looked around at her and raised his heavy brows. "My serpent king knows where you are," she continued. "He has seen your fire, and he will come, as surely as the sun is risen in the east. And he will slay you." "Are you a prophetess, then?" growled Conan. "I think not. Just a foolish girl. I know not why your father loves you so." He walked over to the irate princess, seized her chin in his large hand, and glared down into her fiery eyes. Softly, he said, "I was born on a battlefield. The first sound I heard was a scream. The prospect of a battle does not frighten me." "It frightens me no more," Yazimina flung back at him. "For my lord will lead his minions to my rescue. My lord and future husband, Thulsa Doom." Conan smiled grimly. "Then you shall see the battle, blow by blow, and be right there to greet him when he comes for you." The girl paled slightly as the barbarian untied her from the bedpost and flung her, sack-like, over his shoulder. Striding up the side of the nearest mound, he tethered her against a steel. "Here you can see it all, and he who comes for you can find you readily." Subutai called from below, and Conan descended the slope to find the Hyrcanian cradling an armful of bamboo poles. These he dropped with a clatter. "They'll do for stakes," he said, picking one up and slicing an end at an angle to make a crude spear. "Where did you find them?" asked Conan, beginning to whittle points on the ends of the other poles. "Down by the sea, behind the tall grasses." Presently, when the last sharpened stake lay on the pile, Subutai said, "Doom's likely to come directly from the mountain. Should we not dig the trench on the far side of the mound?" "Aye," said the Cimmerian, "and we'll cover it with the poles, strewn with sod." "If we have time," said Subutai dourly. "I'll fetch shovels from the wizard's root cellar." Soon the two men were hard at work. All morning the earth flew, and the trench took shape. Although the small thief had to rest from time to time, Conan continued like a tireless machine. His mighty muscles, fueled by implacable hatred and lust for revenge, endowed him with a reserve of power beyond imagining, and he excavated thrice as much as an ordinary man. The trench was dug, and the sharpened poles well seated when the wizard brought them bread and cheese and a draught of home-brewed beer. "Do you plan to make your stand here?" he asked. "Here, or up on yonder mound," said Conan. The oldster's glance followed Conan's pointing finger. He nodded. "Many battles were fought here in the ancient time," he said. "At night, the shades of the slain chant grisly tales of combat. Today, there'll be a battle like no other, 2 against many. Old man, if we fall, perhaps you'll sing a song of us when we are gone," said Conan. "Or to us, if we stay a while," added Subutai cheerfully. "I'll take some food and drink to Osric's Spitfire," said Conan. "We can't have her a ghost if we hope to claim a ransom." Climbing the mound, the barbarian offered Yasmina some of the wizard's humble food. She made a face at the rude fare and glanced at the giver, but Conan noted, with amusement, that she ate and drank with eager speed. Still, she was not mollified. After finishing her meal, she taunted him. "It won't be long now." Conan answered, "No, not long." Rejoining Subutai, who was busy fashioning arrows to replenish his supply, Conan set about cleaning and sharpening their swords. As he burnished the great Atlantean blade, he thought of his boyhood, of the power of his arch-enemy, of the skills and cunning that a fighting man must have to overcome the weight of numbers and brute force. He noted with satisfaction that Subutai had been a great help, for the canny Hyrcanian was wise about ploys and stratagems. His nomadic people, though a warrior race, were often outnumbered in their feuds and dependent on trickery to worst their enemies, and his knowledge of such matters would prove valuable in the coming contest. Thus willingly, Conan worked with Subutai to strengthen their defences. They set light poles across the trench and covered them with a thin layer of turf, to look like solid ground. They studied the slabs high on the burial mound and chose those which offered the most protection. They set a quiver of arrows, a supply of throwing stones, and a skin of drinking water in their makeshift fort. Yet, surveying these preparations, they found them inadequate. "The hidden trench should take care of 5 horses and their riders," said Subutai, wiping his sweating brow. "There'll be many more than that," growled Conan. "Perhaps these warrior ghosts will lend a hand," said Subutai with a mirthless grin. "2 men can do so much, no more." "You are dead men walking, for all your preparations," said Yasmina, with a defiant toss of her sable locks. "When my lord and his people come—" Yasmina stopped in mid-sentence. The men glanced at each other and reached for their swords. Below them, on the hill, there came the sound of metal scraping on metal, a clangor unlike any they had ever heard before. They whirled, sinews tensed for action. Then, from Conan's lungs, burst a gargantuan laugh. Coming towards them, slowly, was the old shaman, clothed in ancient armor from head to knee. In his arms he bore an array of breastplates, helmets, and spears. Subutai raced towards him, shouting excitedly, "Where did you get this stuff, old man?" "From the dead." The wizard grinned. "A gift from the dead. You will find more below." He nodded his head in the direction of the hut. As Subutai ran down the mound to gather up greaves, swords, axes, arrows, and a bundle of javelins, Conan picked out a fine breastplate and examined it. "From the dead, you say? But this is strong iron, freshly refurbished. How came it from a grave?" "Ah, you have forgot that I have skill in magic. If I could rekindle your flickering spark of life, it is a lesser feat to beg a gift from those who sleep beneath this mound. Besides, the gods are pleased with you. They will watch the coming battle." "And will they help?" asked the Cimmerian. "No, that they cannot do." "Then they may not like the show they're watching," growled Conan. "We're only 2 against—" The wizard interrupted. "We are 3. "Are you joining us then in the fight?" demanded Conan in surprise. "Why not? Why not?" rejoined the oldster. "If you fall, they will slay me too for harboring you. So I must aid you all I can." With a fleeting smile, he added, "I still know a trick or 2. As the shaman wandered off to inspect the defences, the Cimmerian donned a hauberk of fine mesh mail, a steel helmet, and greaves of thin bronze. He placed a sturdy javelin and an axe at his chosen stand, and thrust a row of javelins, point first, into the loose soil, so that they would be ready when needed. Meanwhile, Subutai had returned, well armed and brimming with exuberance. Surrounded by his favourite weapons, his sword, his great bow, and plenty of arrows, in addition to his newfound arsenal of knives and swords and spears, his indomitable confidence bubbled like a spring of clear water that refreshed his dour companion. "I wonder why they're so long in coming," said Subutai. "Are they afraid of us? Or have they forgotten us already?" Yasmina regarded the Hyrcanian as if he were a noxious insect. "Fool! Do you not know that this is a holy day, set apart by Set for prayers and relaxation? None may bestir himself until the sun goes down." "Why didn't you say so sooner?" rumbled Conan. "You might have had some supper." "I would not make things easier for you, barbarian, no matter what I have to do without. You are the enemy of Set." The sun hung on the horizon, and purple shadows stole across the plain that stretched between the burial mounds of ancient kings and the brooding mountain of power, the heart of Doom's invisible empire. From their places of concealment, Conan, Subutai, and the wizard stared out at the darkening wasteland and waited. The waiting gnawed at their nerves, for they knew that, once darkness swept up the embers of the dying day, the beastmen would attack. "What is that sound?" asked Subutai, startled, as an eerie chanting wafted across the mound. Peering cautiously from their hiding places, they saw the princess standing in her bonds, with the wind in her long hair. She was looking out across the barren land towards the mountain and the setting sun. The last rays kissed her upturned face and tinted her naked arms and shoulders a ruddy gold. The song she sang was strangely melodic, and its volume rose. Its pensive yearning changed to a passionate seduction, which nearly overwhelmed her listeners. Despite her soiled and ragged garments, she looked every inch a priestess and a leader of men. "What now?" mused the shaman, as he regarded the sensuous writhing of the girl and perceived the seductive magic in her chant. Subutai, like one entranced, listened to the unearthly melody and murmured, "How beautiful! What is that she sings?" "Pay no heed," said Conan. "It is some snake god's hymn, designed to lure the innocent to Set and to destruction. Heed it not." As the stars filled the dark vault of heaven, Conan, in his lonely vigil, looked up into the windswept sky. Seldom had he prayed to Crom, god of the Cimmerians, for he had learned that the immortal gods have little interest in the affairs of men. Still, facing almost certain death, the barbarian breathed a supplication. "Crom, I have no tongue for prayer. And to you, the outcome of this battle does not matter. Neither you nor any other will remember why we fought or how we died. But valor pleases you, Lord Crom, and to me it is important. This night, 3 brave men stand against many, and that you may remember. And for my courage and my blood, I ask one thing alone. Grant me revenge before I die." The princess ceased her chanting, and stillness lay upon the darkling land. A wind moaned faintly through the long grasses. A flock of waterfowl, uttering their plaintive cries, passed overhead and vanished into darkness. Somewhere a cricket chirped. Lulled by the quiet and depleted from the Herculean labours of the day, Conan rested, leaning on the handle of his axe. Suddenly, he knew not why, he raised his head and stared into the deepening shadows. His barbarian instincts told him that something was about to happen. Like figures materializing out of Conan's boyhood nightmares, a score of mounted riders, black against the grey and shrouded passage of the day, exploded into a storm of trampling hooves and clanking armour. They thundered towards the mound on which Conan and Subutai had set up their defences. Above the standard-bearer's head floated the well-remembered banner of 2 writhing serpents with fanged mouths, intent upon upholding the black orb of a ragged sun. Faceless in their ornate helms, the minions of the snake god raised their spears and swords and howled like wolves beneath a gibbous moon. Before they reached the mound, the earth seemed to open up beneath the hooves of the foremost riders, and 3 horsemen and their mounts pitched into the spear-impaling pit prepared by the Cimmerian and his companion. Another horse struggled out of the cruel trap, and unmindful of its disabled rider, galloped off across the plain. The beast man climbed out after it and limped away in futile pursuit of his errant mount. Other horses, spurred by expert riders, overleaped the hidden barricade or rode around it, and pounded up the slope to search out the enemy. The barbarian stepped from the protection of a steel and stood, a grim giant in the fading light, for all to see. As one rider thundered down upon him, he hurled a javelin and heard a thud as it struck. A moment later, another rider was upon him. Conan hurled his axe and saw it sink into an armoured chest. A second javelin speared a horse. The animal bucked and threw its rider. Then, galloping a short distance, it collapsed and sank to the ground. The beastman, disregarding his own safety, rushed at the Cimmerian, bellowing a war cry. He threw his hairy torso upon his adversary. unsheathed sword in hand, and brought Conan to his knees. At that moment, a bowstring snapped, and Conan heard the whistle of an arrow. His attacker threw his hands before his face, too late. The shaft pierced his eye and drove him screaming from the mound. Riding with the fury of a storm, another of Doom's men hurtled towards the Cimmerian, lance at the ready. The point made contact with Conan's shield and spun him around. But even as he turned, the wily barbarian snatched his Atlantean blade from its scabbard and slashed the beast's belly. Neighing and rolling its eyes, the terrified animal rose on its hind legs and pawed at the stars, as its rider fell, stunned, at the barbarian's feet. One more stroke of the Atlantean sword sundered the head from the supine body. Another rider, sighting the Hyrcanian, crouched behind a grave marker, galloped up the mound. As he neared Subu'tai's fragile barricade, the small man straightened up and let fly an arrow. With blood fountaining from his torn body, the beast man collapsed and rolled from the mound, while the riderless animal cantered away. Uttering a ringing cry of victory, Subu'tai fitted another arrow into the bowstring. Two other horsemen, heading up the hillock, wheeled to charge down the mound again. One reached the level ground, the other was impaled on Subu'tai's arrow point. He rose in his saddle, shrieking in agony. Then, with a booted foot caught in his stirrup, he was dragged along the rough ground by his frantic steed. Below Conan and Subu'tai, who held to the high ground, moved the wizard, his polished armor shining faintly in the twilight. Thinking the old man mad, Conan sought to give him an avenue of escape, meagre though it might be. As three of the enemy rode towards the wizard, brandishing their weapons, the shaman's spear arced out of the darkness and buried its head in the chest of the foremost horseman. The man fell backward across his horse's rump, and the tightening of the reins brought the animal up so short that it reared, danced on its hind hooves for a moment, and fell backward, pinning the injured rider to the ground. The guard's companions hesitated for an instant to regard their fallen comrade. Then, beneath their helmets, the colour drained from their ape-like faces. For even as they watched, the shaft of the pinioning spear began to rock back and forth, as if an invisible hand were trying to pluck it from the dying body. A moment later, it pulled free and flew, butt first, into the outstretched palm of the ancient shaman. The wide-eyed companions wheeled and fled. Conan's astonishment was short-lived, for another beast-man, this one on foot, moved in on him. The Cimmerian raised his father's sword and dealt his adversary a terrific two-handed blow. The creature parried with the point of a lance, which glanced off Conan's helmet. Swinging the great sword again, he cut the haft of the lance in two, and the beast man staggered, fell, and rolled howling down the hillside. Then, in answer to a command, the beast men drew off to reform their lines on the level ground. Conan glanced up to see Subu'tai knocking another arrow. One rider alone remained atop the hillock. He was heading for the steel to which the princess's wrists were bound. As he approached the girl, who had been crouching in abject terror in the long grass beside the monument during the forays of the beastmen and the spirited defense by the kidnappers, rose with a broad smile on her lips and said, "Rexor, you have come for me! Just sever my bonds and take me to him whom I love." Rexor paced his warhorse towards the eager girl, who held her wrists up to receive the blow that would set her free. But Rexor's eyes were stern, his mien forbidding, as he raised the axe, which shone with silvered light beneath the rising moon. Suddenly, the princess realized that the axe was aimed not at her ropes, but at her slender neck. Instinctively, she fell to her knees, and the axe struck sparks as it cut a gash in the ancient gravestone. The grim rider withdrew with a curse as Subatai's arrow clanged with harmless resonance against his helm. For a brief moment, the embattled three enjoyed a respite. Subutai approached Conan with an ancient sword in his hand and said, "I've used my last arrow." The wizard clambered up the slope, clutching the spear that had struck its target, and returned to the hand whence it was thrown. "Said I not that I still had a trick or two?" he cackled. "Get ready!" cried Subutai suddenly. "Here they come again!" The remaining guards had dismounted, and now they trotted towards the trio in a solid phalanx. Up the slope they came, prepared to search out the small band of defenders should they take refuge once more behind the stones that had marked the graves of kings. Then, halfway up the hill, they hesitated. "Attack!" cried Subutai, as, spear in hand, he prepared to leap forward to face the inhuman creatures who approached them. But Conan restrained his ardour. "Their confusion is more feigned than real. I fear a trap," he muttered. "Keep to the higher ground. We have the advantage of position." A moment later, swords clashed in wild confusion. Conan cut one brute down and felt the sting of a wound on his left arm. Subutai speared another beast-man in the throat, but even as he fell, one of his fellows grasped the shaft, wrenched it from the Hyrcanian's hand, and pointed the blood-stained tip at him. The small man leaped back, stumbled over a broken slab, and lost his balance. Before he could rise, the guard thrust at him with his own spear. The weapon pierced the Hyrcanian's calf and went on into the earth. As the guard brought up his heavy sword to deal a final blow, the shaman's javelin sped through the gloom and took the beastman in the heart. As before, the point was rocked by invisible forces until, loosened, it flew back to its wielder. On the magic weapon came again to strike down another brutish guard. A third turned, slack-jawed, and ran towards the level ground. But the false ground gave way beneath him until he fell, screaming, into the stake-filled pit. Afire with battle madness, Conan rushed from the shelter of the gravestones, hoping to surprise the lone rider who now galloped up the mound. The Cimmerian's spear rang on armor that gleamed in the moonlight, but the spear shaft shattered against his foe's fine steel, and the warrior rode him down. Steel-shod hooves battered the fallen Cimmerian. A deft sword stroke sent his father's sword clattering against a monument. Another blow tore off Conan's helmet. Bleeding profusely, Conan struggled to his knees, too weak to stagger to his feet. The horseman wheeled his charger, rode away for a few paces, then wheeled again to make a final charge against his broken adversary. He pushed back the visor of his helmet to reveal the dark and grinning face of Rexor, his cruel eyes sparkling in anticipation of the mortal blow to come. The Cimmerian reached for his fallen sword and rose. His eyes were slits of blue balefire as he raised the blade in the pit fighter's salute and prepared to sell his life as dearly as he might. Laughing at the injured youth's temerity, the great lieutenant spurred his animal and charged, his sword arm rising for the killing blow. In that instant, a radiant Valeria, arrayed in shimmering armor, with lustrous blonde hair floating beneath a winged helmet of unearthly metal, appeared beside her helpless lover. Her well-muscled limbs were shining in the moonlight, The tulwar she uplifted flashed with blue lightning. As Rexor raised his weapon to smash it down on the barbarian's head, his arm was stayed by her fiery sword. Rexor recoiled before the shining figure, who, with a deft cross stroke, whipped her blinding blade across his unguarded eyes. He clapped one gauntleted hand to his face to shield his eyes from the intolerable light, and sat his steed as one transfixed. Conan gaped at the shining figure, his nape hairs bristling with superstitious awe. The bright girl turned a laughing face towards him, and in his mind he heard her say, "Cimmerian, do you want to live forever?" As Conan straightened with renewed determination, it was as if the glittering figure in unearthly metal had never been, save that a fading ghost-like glory glimmered against the sky. And Conan remembered the words uttered by Valeria after the wizard, by his magic, had driven off the clutching hands of death and all his minions. She had whispered, "My love is stronger than death. Were I dead and you in peril, I would return from hell itself to fight beside you." The memory of such love gave a generous measure of pride to the wounded barbarian. Painfully, he made his way to the dark horse on which the Lieutenant of Doom sat, nursing his dazzled eyes. He slipped the giant's foot from the nearest stirrup and forced the huge man from his saddle. As Rexor landed, cat-like, on his feet, the Cimmerian slapped the horse's rump, and the frightened animal careened away into the darkness. Conan rushed on Rexor, striking mercilessly at his armoured form. Rexor, his eyes recovered from the brilliance, slashed at his younger enemy. Conan, deflecting the blow, ducked and rejoined the fray, driving the big man back with massive, wheeling strokes. Then, with a single overhand blow of the two-handed sword, the Cimmerian drove his steel into the cultist's neck. Rexor remained upright, a tower of muscle rooted to the ground. Then suddenly, he toppled forward, his armour clanking, and lay still. Conan took a deep breath and looked around. Subutai, with his leg bandaged, and the wizard beside him, stood on the edge of the mound, watching a knot of retreating guards gallop towards the mountain of power. Soon the maw of night swallowed them. The silence that had fallen on the deserted battlefield was broken by the girlish voice of Yazimina. The three looked up to find the lean, ascetic figure of Thulsa Doom outlined against the star-decked sky. Elegant in his reptilian armour, he sat his horse proudly and faced the bedraggled girl who was Princess of Zamora, Priestess of Set, and his intended bride. "Master, I told them you would come for me," she trilled. "Unbind me now, so that I may come to you." "That cannot be," was the cult leader's stony reply. "They have defiled you, as they have defiled my temple precincts." "Nay, Lord Doom, not so. I have been faithful to you, my lord, my father. Desert me not." "You are no longer fit to be my bride." "Then, master, I will be your slave, and gladly. Do not leave me here among the enemies of Set." "Fear not, my child." Doom's silk-smooth voice was comforting. Thulsa Doom spoke no further word, but unwound a writhing viper from his neck, and as before transformed it into a deadly arrow. Yazimina watched without comprehension, but Subutai saw the Snake King's movement and guessed what he was going to do. As Doom knocked the magic arrow, the Hyrcanian limped forward, careless of his wound. Just as the missile came hissing through the air, Subutai interposed his shield between the viper arrow and its intended victim. The arrow thumped into the wood, turned back into a snake, and fell writhing to the ground. The small thief drew his sword and hacked it into pieces. Yasmina laid her head on her bound wrists and wept hysterically. Conan stalked slowly towards the cult leader, staring at him through slit eyes, and placed himself between the princess and her tormentor. Doom glanced at the sword clutched in the Cimmerian's brown fist, the blade of fine Atlantean steel forged by a village smith so many years ago. And as he looked into the determined face of the barbarian, the cold hand of fear lay on the heart of Thulsa Doom. Shuddering, he spurred his black steed and, wheeling, rode off after the vanquished remnant of his guard. "Powerful spirits abide hereabouts," said the ancient wizard, adding, "and today they fought for you." "I know, old man. I know," mumbled Conan, thinking of the shining figure of Valeria. "And you and Subutai did much to win the day." Then the young giant turned and cupped the princess's face gently in his large hands. "He would have killed you. You know that. First he sent his servant, then he came to do it himself." The girl nodded dumbly. Conan continued, "Now I must kill him, for he is evil, and you must take me to him. Are you willing?" Again the princess nodded, and the sad smile of a lost child flitted across her tear-stained face as he hacked her bonds apart. "You will understand. Some day. When you are a queen," he said. Through the remainder of the night, Conan and the shaman, in turn, kept watch over the princess and the wounded man. At dawn, Conan awoke and, looking up, saw the wizard standing beside him. The old man murmured, "Let me see the talisman you took from the slain warrior woman. I would study it in yonder light." Pointing to a narrow shaft of sunlight that had found its way into the hut, he added, "My knowledge may prove useful to you." Conan removed the gem from his neck and handed it to the old man. The wizard carried the jewel to the window and watched its radiance suffuse his simple abode. At last he spoke. "This is the Eye of Set, is it not? Know you aught of its magical properties?" "No," said Conan. "To me it is but a bauble to be sold." "Amongst us wizards it has much repute. Whence came you on it?" "We stole it from the Serpent's Tower in Shadizar," confessed the Cimmerian. "We risked our lives to get it." "No wonder the faithful guarded it so well, or that they would destroy you to regain it," exclaimed the wizard. "One of its many powers, they say, is to command the beastmen who Doom keeps to do his bidding. Raise it before one and command him, and he cannot but obey." Conan stared in amazement. "Crom, why did you not tell me this before? It would have saved some desperate handplay yesterday." The shaman spread his hands. "I tried to question you about the jewel before, but you refused to speak of it and hid it in your bosom." Conan bit his lip. "I own you have the right of it, old man. It must have been a trick of that malicious fate, of whom I've heard the learned speak. Well, I yet have work to do, and it may still prove useful to me." So saying, he slipped the cord over his head, and once more buried the jewel beneath his garment.